Thank you, Sam. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to spend the next couple of hours talking about flood insurance. We'll spend most of our time talking about the new law, the Biggert Waters Flood Insurance Reform Act of 2012. We're also going to touch on some other flood-related issues that are lingering out there that really didn't come out of Dodd-Frank. I got Dodd-Frank on the brain these days. Really didn't come out of the Biggert Waters Act, but they are significant events all the same. Now, as we go through here, what I think you're going to see, what I believe you'll conclude, is that the Biggert Waters much improves the flood insurance situation, clears up some problems we've had, but it's still not great. There's still a lot of issues out there, and it's frustrating because you look at some of these issues, and we'll be talking about them as we go through here. They seem so easy to solve, and yet they don't get any better. So we have some frustration there, I believe. But the big event happened last summer. On July 6th, the president signed a much bigger law called Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century, which is basically another road-building law so they can tear up highways everywhere I travel. Included in that MAP 21 law is the Biggert Waters Act. And, folks, Biggert Waters, it was a long time coming. The National Flood Insurance Program has been bankrupt. It's been broken significantly since 2005 when Katrina and Rita hit the Gulf Coast. There's been an effort underway since 2005 to get the flood insurance program back on sound financial footing. And, folks, I can look at it one way and say, can you believe something that was so obviously broken that it took them 7 years to fix it? I can be incredulous in that direction. And then I can also look at it and say, this took an act of Congress. Both houses had to cooperate. They had to balance a budget for the insurance fund for this agency, and they got it done. Can you believe they got anything passed in the Congress that we have currently? So like I said, I can be incredulous. Either way you want me to go with this one, folks, I can do it. So, yeah, it was a long time in coming. They fixed something that was obviously broke, but they did take steps that I believe will get it back on sound footing, the program back on sound footing within a couple of years. We hope. So again, we'll look at Biggert Waters, all the provisions of Biggert Waters, and we'll look at a few other areas as well. We have some goals down at the bottom of page 1 of your printed materials that basically summarize some of the major provisions that we'll be discussing here in the program. We give you a little background over on page 2 of the printed materials. The flood insurance has been a series of laws. The original one that created the National Flood Insurance Program back in 1968 was the National Flood Insurance Act. Significant revisions came in 73 when they did the Flood Disaster Protection Act, which made the purchase of flood insurance mandatory. We had the National Flood Insurance Reform Act of 1994, which added various measures trying to increase the compliance rate of banks requiring and maintaining flood insurance appropriately. They added penalties, among other items, in 1994. And then now we have the Biggert Waters Flood Insurance Reform Act of 2012. The regulations we have listed there are the agency's existing regulations. We're expecting guidance from the agencies at some point. Probably some revisions to regs. Most definitely some updating of the frequently asked questions and answers. The law creates some situations that need clarification. The law, for the most part, was effective back on July 6th of last year. There are certain provisions that are delayed, one until the fall of 2012, one until July of 2014. But unless delayed, basically the provisions took effect immediately. But some of those provisions that took effect immediately do necessitate either FEMA or the bank regulatory agencies drafting regs, opinions, Q's and A's, some form of guidance. And nobody seems to be in too big a hurry to get that out there. So we're in a state of flux now. We have provisions of the law that supposedly are in effect. FEMA's not doing their part. The regulatory agencies are not doing their part. And yet we have potential exposure because the law is in effect. So it's kind of crazy times. But as we're going through here, we'll talk about in effect later, laws in effect, but we don't have regs yet. So we'll touch on those as we're going through the provisions here in a little bit. Down at the bottom of page 2, the main source here for resource materials would be FEMA's website. Of course, you go to your agency's website to get the agency's regulation. All right, starting over on page 3, we get into the actual provisions of the Biggert Waters Act, and I have them listed in the order of the section numbers in the law. So these, the book is in the same order in which these provisions appeared in the law. I mentioned that the law happened back on July 6th. Like I said, we have some sections that are delayed, some sections where we know we're going to get regulations, some sections where we strongly suspect, or at least strongly hope, we're going to get some regulations clarifying things. But not all of it's going to have regs. Some of it takes effect immediately. The third box down on page 3, we talk about extension of the National Flood Insurance Program. Let's do a little history here. Flood insurance program's been around since '68, and when we talk about extending the funding or the financing for the program, you know, some bankers apparently are unaware that historically all flood insurance premiums were subsidized. Translated, that would mean when you require somebody to go get flood insurance and they're complaining that they got to buy that expensive flood insurance, that you're unaware and they're unaware that you're helping pay for that. You know, when your customers get insurance, we all help pay for it. Comes out of the government. Government subsidizes these premiums. Okay? So the government has to put up their part of the money to make the program work. Customer pays part, government. We pay the rest. Traditionally, the government has funded the National Flood Insurance Program in 3- and 5-year slugs. Here's your funding for the next 3 years. Here's your funding for the next 5 years. When Katrina and Rita hit in 2005, we had 3 years of funding left. The funding was in place through 2008. When that funding expired in 2008, since then, Congress has been funding the program in 60 and 90-day increments. Here's your funding for the next 60 days. Here's your funding for the next 90 days. Not a real efficient way of running a national flood insurance program. And it's created some problems. But the reason they did it is they knew if they did a 3- or 5-year funding, their effort at getting this bill passed, and again, it took them from 2005 really until 2012 to get it done, 7-year period, they would have never gotten it done if they didn't keep throwing this issue in the face of Congress. Every 60 to 90 days, the issue of flood insurance had to come before Congress again so we could get approved for another 60 or 90 days. So the issue kept coming up, and they could keep getting a little steps done. Okay, we got a little victory here. Ooh, a little backslide here. Another little victory here. Another little victory. And, you know, gradually, over 7 years of constantly keeping this issue before Congress, they got it done. But if you look at the middle of page 3, we point out some of the problems that there have been 18 stopgap extensions, 60 to 90-day extensions since 2008. And we point out that twice the program was shut down for several weeks. One of the biggest problem times was in June of 2010, where the funding wasn't there. They didn't get the new 60 to 90 days of funding in place quickly enough. The old program expired. The new funding wasn't there. No one could get flood insurance for that couple of week period because there was no funding. The program was shut down, and it held up 40,000 home sales. 40,000 home sales around the nation were stopped because they needed flood insurance and it wasn't available. And, if it's in a flood zone and a participating community, you can't make the loan unless you got insurance, and none was available. So this stopgap financing deal was a mess, but they got the job done. And, first provision in the new law is, okay, here's your funding for the next 5 years, funding through 2017. All right, so that's kind of taken care of now for a few years. At the bottom of page 3, we talk about multifamily properties. And folks, this one kind of caught me by surprise. I didn't know that